Hello, everyone, and good evening. Great to have you join us for a session of Cloud Talk, a webinar series by Generation T. I'm Chong Jin Seong, the Malaysian editor for Generation T, and this evening we'll be having a discussion about what makes great company culture and how leaders can reassess and improve their existing frameworks and processes. So we'll be hearing insights from 3 business leaders over here who all hail from different industries and companies of different sizes. So I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot about interesting anecdotes they have about how they're running their companies. And this discussion will run for about 35 minutes and we'll proceed to a Q&A towards the end, and we will take questions from you, our audience. So after which we will conclude with the webinar with some closing remarks. So now let's go through a few housekeeping matters. So today's session is being recorded and will be posted on Gen T's website and social channels with an article coming out next week. As we are familiar, all attendees on Zoom will have their cameras switched off and their mics off as well. So please feel free to use the chat box to interact with your fellow attendees. If you have any questions for our panelists, please post it to the chat box and we will get them to the Q&A later. So finally, if you're sharing this event on social media, please tag us and use the handles that you see on the screen right now. So before we start with our discussion, I'd like to thank our partner BMW Malaysia for making this evening's session possible. Most of us know the premium German automaker for its beautiful cars, excellent craftsmanship, and clever innovation. But BMW is a brand that strongly believes in leading by example, especially if it's leading by change. So now we'll play a quick video that will show us how they're doing just that.
You know the business world is changing when working turns into co-working and offices can be everywhere, even here. Showing empathy is now a sign of strength, and the environment jumps to the top of everyone's agenda. So, are you ready to change?
Alright, now the scene has been set, let's welcome our 3 panelists today to begin the discussion. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for taking the time off your busy schedules to join us today. So very quickly, let's go around the room and let's start around introductions. So I'll start from my left, going to the right. So Kevin, Kevin, you have 3 businesses. It's really crazy for you. I imagine it's crazy all the time right now, especially after post-COVID. So tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Wu, and I'm the founder and CEO of 3 various companies. My first startup is in the alternative protein industry. I run a venture-backed company based out of KL. My second startup is in the furniture retail space, so that deals with more traditional businesses and consumers. And my latest startup is my law firm, which is a full-service law firm based out of KL. I've been recently listed on Tatler Generation T as well as Forbes 30 Under 30.
All right, thank you. And next to you, Nadia.
Hi everyone, I'm Nadia. I'm the CEO of Thomson Hospital Kota Damansara and also the Group CEO for TMC Life Sciences Berhad, which is a healthcare company listed on the Malaysian Stock Exchange, and we have businesses in hospitals, fertility clinics, traditional Chinese medicine, and also retail pharmacies.
All right, thank you for that, Nadia. And lastly, but not least, Renyi.
Hi guys, so my name is Renyi. I'm one of the co-founders of My Burger Lab and My Pizza Lab. We are a creative burger and pizza joint, and we've been around in the business for almost 9 years.
Great, okay, I like it. Everyone's short and simple, so let's jump straight to the discussion then. So to set the scene up right now, in a time where a company can stretch all around the globe, culture is the glue that holds everything together. So it comes to no surprise that a company's culture is the key to success, and it acts as a code of conduct, a shared set of values that determines how things are done and within the company, and appealing to those who are going to be in the workplace, both their current and potential hires. So according to research, nearly 70% of business leaders agree that culture provides the greatest source of competitive advantage. So let me pose to you, Renyi, first question. How do you define company culture and what makes it an important responsibility of a leader?
I think that the company culture is what the founder has to define and has to exude in his daily life, right? I think everyone beneath us will be looking up to us, and whatever we say and do, it's not just something that we tell others to do. We have to practice it, we have to live it. So for me, when I first started my Burger Lab, I took a lot of inspirations from other companies that I worked with that I enjoyed being with. And I said, hey, look, those things made me want to stay. Those things want me to contribute more. So I want to make sure that was a part of my company. But apart from that, I also learned from the companies that I didn't enjoy being in because I wanted to make sure that bad culture wasn't a part of who we were. So it was a very conscious decision. And at the same time, I knew that I had to be the one who not only say it, but also act upon it. So to me, culture is not just a piece of paper that you stick on a wall and say, hey, look, this is who we are, and then you go on about your own business. I think it's something that we leaders have to live, and hope to some extent the team sees that, gets inspired, and practices it as well.
Okay, that's great to hear. Kevin, how about yourself? You manage 3 companies, so that must be really interesting setting up a culture within 3 companies, right?
Yeah, so just building from what Renee said, company culture is what you do and don't do. It's not just a set of principles that is written down on a website or on a piece of paper. It's something that you have to practice every single day. So for me, running 3 separate companies with employing people from various age groups, from boomers to millennials and Gen Zs, to define a culture, each business and each industry has its own kind of culture that dictates how customers behave or how your suppliers behave. So for me, I wouldn't say that each one of my ventures have the same culture, but I try to instill this standardized culture of being open and being transparent and leading and setting by example, not just in my professional life, but also in my personal life.
I see. That's great to hear. And Nadia, lastly for yourself, how do you approach culture within Thomson Hospital?
Well, I think culture is really important, particularly with very large organizations, because you basically have to build a tribe for literally thousands of people, define an identity for them, and give them a reason, what's so special about working here versus another company. And so for us, I think culture is really about setting the expectation and mindset for the people who work at Thomson Hospital. And so how we make decisions, what the expectations that we have of our employees. So for us, a few things that are important is that we want to be innovative, we want to be timely, we want to be sustainable. And so these are kind of the guardrails that, employees can make decisions on, because for a large company, you can't micromanage everyone. And so I think that the company culture is a very important guideline for people who are working in the organization to make the right decision so that everybody still continues to be aligned.
Okay, that's great to hear. So each of you have a different approach to it, but definitely I hear a similarity to your approach to how you establish culture. But it's also pretty challenging having it of course, I mentioned just now to Kevin's case, and to you as well, Nadia, you have several businesses that you do, and to the extent, Renyi, you also have several businesses. How do you look at how different cultures gel within the company, and what's your experience like in trying to establish these cultures within the different subsets of companies that you run? Can we start with Kevin? Since you
Yeah. So just trying to summarize and build on what was previously mentioned, that for large organizations, especially for me, there's approximately 60 to 70 people, but not every single one of them report directly to me. So I have my reporting managers, but most importantly, what makes the whole organization stick and run smoothly is the company culture, because that is the glue that keeps everyone in line. What you say, what you do, what you practice is extremely important, because without the right culture, I think that's what Nadia alluded to, it's very difficult to attract good talent and run a profitable and sustainable business in the long run. So having a company culture is extremely important in the long run. And I don't think it's a part-time thing. I think it's something that needs to be worked on and practiced every single day. And company culture can change over time, but it's something that cannot be changed overnight.
Very true. And I think stats show that only 10% of companies actually succeed in building a winning kind of culture. So what do you, pose this to Nadia, what do you think are 3 essential qualities of a healthy workplace culture to you?
Okay, so for me, I think for a healthy workplace culture, the top thing, number 1, is transparency, sharing of information to everyone, because if people don't get a full view or the right information, they may make wrong decisions and they may go off on a wrong tangent. So that's really important, but some companies are really afraid of that because they think there is an issue of trust. So secondly is trusting your employees. And for me, I think it's important to trust people first until they've proven they can't be trusted. Because, in restricting ourselves in terms of empowering or giving them information, we're actually limiting ourselves unnecessarily. And by trusting employees and giving them information, they may come up with unexpected ideas. So for example, at Thomson, we started the drive-through PCR test very early on. And it was an idea from employees who saw what was happening in South Korea, and they said, let's do this. And they put it together within 2 weeks. So, that was completely up to them. They were empowered. You trust them. And, they have the information about whether it's working or not working. And everyone in the organization is pitching in together. So I think that that's really important as well. And last, of course, but not least, is communication. I think to build a culture, you need to consistently communicate the reason behind why you're doing things and not expect people to just read your mind or know what's happening, because in your mind, it might make sense that all the dots are connected, but other people are looking and saying like, what is this? So I think communicating is also really, really important.
Those 3 great points that you made there, Nadia. So like for you, Rennie, what do you think in your organization, how are you putting these 3, do you have 3 essential qualities that you look for when you're creating culture?
I think if you ask Nadia, there's probably more than 3. And she made 3 really good points as well. But just to add on to that, and I agree wholly with what she said, I think that empowering them to allow them to interpret their own values and culture, because as the company grows, we have to admit that there will be a dilution in culture understanding, right? I think as I mentioned in my previous statement, the founders will be the core person that dictates what the core culture is. But as it moves down the hierarchy, there will be a dilution. But you should keep it to, a level where it is still acceptable. So having that constant communication, that constant feedback with leaders of the company and seeing if they are still aligned is very important. And for my company, which is about 9 years old, in fact, our values and our cultures are shaped over time, and we take feedback from the different company leaders on, hey, look, who are we today? 3 years in, who are we today? Another 6 years in, who are we today? And how do we want to define that? What have we learned? What works? What doesn't work? And I think that's where the evolution is. So while I may not have 3 points, what I'm trying to say is that make it not just only yours, right? But make it a part of them as well. And when they have that feedback, they have a sense of ownership. And that's where you will see them continue to practice and educate the others when it comes to what the company value and culture is. And I think when you have that, people from outside will see it, and that's where you attract people of the same talent. And I love the story where the team came out with their own initiative to do the drive-thru initiative. And that is an example of a team that gels together, understand what the mission is, and went ahead and do it. So on my side, my team also does that occasionally, and they do surprise me when they come up with initiatives themselves. Although there are times where I go like, what was that, right? What's that all about? But allowing them to have successes, praise them, reward them, and allowing them to make failures, right? Hopefully not too big ones. I think that's what a great company should be, right? It shouldn't be always, hey, look, there's only success, there's no failure. And I think with that, you have a company that not just have great culture, but have a team that feels, and this sounds cliche, feels like a family, feels like a single unit.
Well, I'm not keeping track of how many points you made, but I agree those are pretty good points you made right there. So, alluding to something that Kevin mentioned just now, like company culture isn't something, aside the Rennie, I think either one of you guys, you mentioned that company culture isn't something that you paste on the wall and that's going to be like in a placard, and then I look at it and let's follow that vision, But so how do you practice what's being laid out there? And did you face any challenges in enforcing the culture, or do you keep it open, as you say? Kevin?
Yeah, totally agree with what Renee mentioned. Starting a company at the start, the founders pretty much define the culture because it's such a small group of people. But as the company grows, you need to have that North Star to know what your principles are and have that reflected across the company. Because as your company grows, as you're hiring more and more people, you need to find people who would fall into that, would align with your culture. Because there's plenty of examples of people joining companies, and they could be extremely high-level positions that have power to shape or reshape the culture in either in a good or bad way. So it's extremely important to know your North Star, to set those foundations and principles. As Jin Seong mentioned, it's not something we paste on the wall and then just read it out loud. It's something that we practice every day. What you do or don't do defines a culture. For example, if you let a certain thing slide by or let mistakes happen, or it could be small or big, and you just ignore it, that also defines a culture. That basically signals to everyone that there is that room for complacency and whatnot. But I totally agree with what my fellow panelists have also mentioned, that it's all about trust, empowerment to the people that comes in. That is the key ingredient to building a winning culture.
All right.
So I've seen some examples of companies where there's a large tennis table in the office, but no one dares to play on the table tennis because everyone's afraid what the superiors or their bosses might think. So that kind of it's not about even the furniture or the facilities you have in your office.
Right. So it's more than just beanbags, tables, and stuff like that. I'm sure there are no beanbags in your hospital, right, Nadia? So,
no, unfortunately not.
You don't, right? So I mean, how is there any challenge you face in trying to get people on board with your vision?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I mean, leaders are really important because I think that you send, whether you like it or not, indirect signals to people as to they're trying to gauge what is it that you would tolerate, what is acceptable within the company. And so, you're always going to be in the spotlight if you're the leader, because like it or not, you're sending out signals. You may not even realize it, but people are watching you very closely. Who are they having lunch with? Is it okay? Or do we have to dress formally or not? They follow all the cues. So I think that's one of the things where, as a leader, you become very self-aware about all these indirect signals that you're sending out. And the other thing that I think is that as the organization grows, as Renee mentioned, it gets really, really hard to sort of onboard people onto that culture and make them understand and continue to have that drive. And so I think it's really important that you always revisit this question about why and how you are engaging with the employees, because just because you've done it once doesn't mean your job is done. It is a constant thing that needs to happen. And when challenges come, like with healthcare, we had COVID, right? So the whole, how does this culture react in a situation with a pandemic where, nobody worked from home in the hospital before. And then all of a sudden you had all this administrative staff who needed to work from home, but the hospital was still running 24/7. What kind of culture do we need then? And so, you always have to respond to the challenges that are happening and keep that questioning and adapting and evolution alive. Otherwise, you may become irrelevant.
Right. Thank you for that. I mean, those are really great points you made there. So coming on to the next thing, change is an inevitable part about running a business, and we know that very well now. As you just mentioned, COVID-19 has really changed the way that culture plays into business today, and people are recalibrating their lives, and some are even looking at switching their jobs. So how does that affect your perception of being a good leader? Rennie, I think you face some of these problems, especially in your business with F&B being hit really hard. What's your experience like?
You're talking about change, right?
Yeah, about change.
So thankfully, in Burger Lab, from day one of the things that we say, the only constant is change, or change is the only constant. And in fact, a lot of staff in the early days have left us because every few months there's a new SOP. Every few months, when you say that, hey, this is the best way to cook the burger, and then a few months down the road, no, this is the new best way to cook a burger. And why we had those changes was because, we were learning, we were trying to figure things out, we were trying to be more efficient, but not everyone adapts to that. So back then, the culture of change wasn't a part of us. But over time, those who stick by us, those who continue to be with us, started to understand change was a part of the company DNA. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. We talk about culture. What is actually culture? I think culture, just like individually, we're all ethnically different, but we have individual culture. Culture is something that is done over time. The values that you preserve, the values that you practice, the language that you use, that becomes culture. Same in a company. When you're a new company, your culture is still kind of flimsy, right? But over time, you prove to yourself and your team what your real culture is. So because change was such a big a part of who we are, when COVID came, it actually played to our favor. We were so nimble on our feet. We were able to pivot very quickly. We were able to address what the problem was. It actually saved us. We didn't make a lot of money, but we were able to pay bills. We were able to pay salary. We didn't have to retrench anyone. And that is credit to the team, where I was like, okay, this week we're going to do this. And the next week we're going to do that. And when the government were changing SOPs here and there, we were able to adapt to it. We were annoyed for sure.
Yeah.
But the adaptability was our DNA, was one of the small part of our culture. And I think that's where what great culture means, right? When you practice it long enough, when it truly, it stands the test of time.
Right. That's great. Nadia, you're obviously in the healthcare business. It was really challenging. So did the pandemic affect how you approach retaining your talents? Were people like burnt out and stuff like that? I'm sure you put some measures in place, but how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it was really, really difficult. I think the first thing we had to confront was fear. A lot of people were very afraid of working with COVID. There was no vaccine at the time. We had a lot of staff town halls to explain to them what precautions we were taking. We had to constantly update them and share with them articles, invite outside experts to come in and address their concerns. So that was the first thing. And secondly, I think the entire personal life of people just went topsy-turvy because schools were closed, shops were closed. It's really funny, like when the photostat shops were closed, it's a big impact for people because suddenly they couldn't print out, I don't know, their kids' homework and things like that. So we actually started up our daycare center, Thomson Little Stars, in the middle of the pandemic, and it runs right up to the middle of the night because we've got to cover all the nurses who are doing 3 shifts. And we recognize that they have responsibility, taking care of their kids, their spouse, also their parents usually. And so it's really quite difficult. And you have to understand, I think, the whole psychological makeup of the people who were working during that time, during the pandemic. It was very difficult. And we had all these mental health awareness activities, expressive dance therapy sessions with the clinical psychologist. And I think people appreciated that. I think it's really important to be genuinely caring for people. I don't think that you could have a culture where the leader doesn't care about the people working in the company. But I think that's even more amplified in healthcare because if you expect the staff to take care of someone else, you got to take care of them first.
Exactly.
That's right. So coming to this, I've read that the Harvard Business Review says that culture expresses goals through values and beliefs and guides activities through a shared assumption and group norms. So a big part of your roles as leaders is to create value with your employees and nurture them become leaders like yourselves. And I think some of you did mention that you're looking at empowering your employees and leading them to be more taking ownership of their actions and becoming more vested in the company. Kevin, the two have already gone for a bit, so I want to know, from your perspective, how do you do that? And not going back to 3 companies again, but how do you manage it for Ento perhaps?
I think totally agree with what the panelists have said. For example, if an engaged employee is we have to take care of our employees because during COVID, these were really trying times, and this is where when things are fine, everything works well. But when things get difficult, what you do, how you treat your employees when perhaps your revenue drops to close to zero, how you treat your employees sends a huge signal to your entire team. right? And how you deal with situations when there's a mishap, or how do you react to things. Those are signals that will stay within your company. For example, I know some companies that have when there was lockdown, immediately company retrenched everyone, even though they've been there for a couple of decades. And I don't think that's a way to treat employees. But of course, with each business has its own challenges.
Okay.
If I may add on to that,
Yeah,
actually,
go ahead.
in the F&B industry, a lot of people's first reaction was to retrench and was to pay cut. And as Kevin put it rightly, everyone has a different challenge, right? But right now, when the economy has opened up, F&B is having a super tough time hiring. And a lot of it is because people feel like, you know what, we were not appreciated before COVID. And then during COVID, obviously, we were the first to be sacrificed. And why do I want to come back to the industry? And especially hotels. Hotels are absolutely having a difficult time hiring people. And I think that's exactly it, right? If your reputation of, hey, this company or that company has made a great effort to keep everyone within the team and not have the first knee-jerk reaction is to terminate everyone. And it stays. Post-COVID, there are companies that people are saying, hey, look, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. So he rightly said it, right? Your culture or your values should stand the test of time, and also in a crisis. That's when it really matters.
Especially in a crisis, you have to walk the talk.
Exactly. I mean, for Nadia yourself, how do you empower your employees? I mean, you mentioned really great examples there. Are there any other ways that your employees are, coming up with new ideas? And I understand that you listen to them as well. Open door policy, right? And you do take in their feedback. So how do you do
I
that?
guess it's like how you view yourself, like what's your role in the company, right? Because as a CEO, I'm not actually on the ground treating patients. And I view my role as like being a sounding board for them, to facilitate them to accomplish things and to push them a little bit further and ask them the tough questions, and also ask them why not, or what is possible out there, and sort of paint them a picture of what's possible. So I think that's really important. I think for leaders to remember, like, what is their role within the organization. It's not so much to micromanage, actually do the work, but you still have to make them feel like you are with them. And not really apart. So I think that's the balance that most leaders have to find their way around, how they do it in terms of whether it's like communication, events or things that they do to sort of give that feeling to the people in the company that, yes, we're here to listen, what is the role, but at the same time, you're there with them.
Right. I mean, like, coming to that, I mean, I'm listening to you, you have a lot to say about how you're empowering people, and Randy, you also have a lot of experience with dealing with, I mean, as tough as it is, stick through with your employees and they'll stick together with you. So there's a particularly special a bunch of employees I'm sure will be coming up about next. So I'm going to talk about how more Gen Zs are going to be entering the workforce. And, in the coming years, there'll be a new generation of people, and they're going to bring new values and expectations to work. So the research says that they're even more purpose-driven than millennials, and they are stickler for authenticity. So knowing that, and like showing, like you say, Nadia, how a company cares for them, and how, do they align with your values? Like, can I pose the question to you, Randy? How do you take that into consideration when, developing, the culture for the next generation of employees that are coming in?
So here's the thing. I think every generation catch the flag. The previous generation always complain about the next generation. Back in the days, it was the millennials that was causing all the problem, right? And I'm quite sure back in the days, the boomers were complaining that the Gen X, right, were the ones that, they don't care about hard work, this and that. I think it's human evolution. I think more than ever, now that a lot of our basic needs are met, and in an age of digitization and information, people know that, hey, there is something better out there. There are better work culture, there are better work practices, right? And I don't think it's wrong to demand that. So as a company, while it can be annoying sometimes that, hey, look, we got to address this. This is the new norm. I think what the Gen Z wants, the millennial wants too. It's just that they might be too, not arrogant, but too prideful to say, hey, that's what I want, but I've gone through the hardship. Why can't you go through the hardship, right? But if you think about it, if I was in a Gen Z shoe, I want the workplace that they describe. I want the workplace. I wish that when I started working out, that was what I experienced, right? And I think every generation should be doing better than the next. So again, us as My Burger Lab, we are that flexible. In fact, right now within the team, we are talking about how do we address all these new needs, the new pay grade, right? And in F&B, it's a little bit challenging, not more challenging than the others, but right now it's because F&B in Malaysia has been ingrained with certain practices and certain norms across the industry. And if you want to break that chain, it's very difficult. And we're trying to find ways around it. But again, what I'm trying to say here is every generation should be doing better than the next. It's not about being lazy. I think it's about being more efficient. It's all about being purpose-driven. Back in the days, it's, hey, you got a job, be happy about it,
Yeah.
right? But what if you have a job and you love your job and you are damn good at it, right? And everyone can achieve some level of ikigai, right, as they call it. I think that should be the pursuit, rather than saying, hey, look, this generation is snowflake, right? Every generation is snowflake to the prior.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Agree. So Kevin, I mean, in your businesses, you have like, I understand like your law firm in particular, you are doing something different. And is that something different that between the different companies like Ento and your law firm, that you have different sets of people and you are trying to attract different talents for them? So like, I mean, like, how is that for you in this case, I mean, for Gen Z who are coming in?
Yeah. So just to contrast between my Ento, which is a food tech startup, and my law firm, they're completely different industries. So my startup is more like the typical millennial Gen Z culture where things are more laid back, flexible. Everything it's I guess it's not so fixed, right? Because we need to be adaptable as we evolve our business model over time. Compared to a traditional industry like the legal industry, everyone that I interview or hire come from somewhat a traditional industry, because it's the nature of the industry that there are rules, there are procedures, and this is replicated throughout the cultures replicated throughout other legal firms, especially coming from a large law firm myself where I was trained as a corporate lawyer. The rules are very fixed, and just to contrast that firm and different companies, that it requires different skills, and the way you communicate with people may be different. So it really depends on your industry, which industry you're in, and what are they, as Rennie alluded to, what are the what's common practice within the industry, and sometimes very tough because it's a structural culture that is very difficult to change overnight.
I see. So maybe for you, Nadia, I got a different question for you. How would you create a work culture that is authentic and meaningful and fully engaged with your employees? I mean, surely you have some experience doing that, right?
Well, it's a lot of communication, a lot of talking, a lot of listening. For example, in the hospital, we have this clash of civilizations because our consultants are usually in their 50s. And by and large, the nurses are in their 20s. And you see a lot of clashes in terms like, for example, communication preferences. So the doctors always want somebody to talk to them face to face or call. And the younger generation is like, I don't want to pick up the phone. I just want to text you and you just reply. And then maybe if you don't reply, I might call you, but I want to avoid talking to you as much as possible. And so this can cause a lot of misunderstandings, unhappiness, because they feel uncomfortable with just how things are happening. And so you always have to like bring groups together, discuss what is the middle ground and come to an agreement, because I think the one thing that everyone agrees is that change is going to happen. So the reality of, WhatsApp groups at work is not going to go away. And people just have to adapt to that. And we have to figure out, well, for Thomson, what does that mean? Should we have a policy? What what are the expectations around chat groups at work? And these are the kind of questions that you always have to ask yourself when the next thing comes around. So it's definitely very messy because you're dealing with human emotions, you're dealing with people's preferences, their level of comfort with things. But I think it's really important as a leader that you focus on that. I think people takes up, majority of the time of a leader, that and also strategy and visioning. So I think it's a really important part that people should not let go of, and you have to, keep trying to build that middle ground and so that you can cross across all the different stakeholder groups that you may have in your organization and keep asking the questions.
Great point over there. So we've gone on for a little bit, but I want to take things down a notch and ask about how you guys are doing personally. So how do you keep your mental health in these challenging times? And maybe Randy, for yourself, I think like you said, unfortunately before this, you put a bit, we all gotten a bit
I gained a little bit of weight
because of that. But how do you do that? I think I see your IG, you're being really studious with your swimming and stuff like that. Is there something that you do for your mental health or other activities?
I'll be honest, I'm on auto mode for the most part for the last 3 years. Burned out a long time ago. But I think the ability for founders to persevere is quite amazing. For a lot of times, I thought I was done, and I was like, you know what, I'm done. I just want to call it quits. But the next day you wake up and you go like, I gotta do this. I gotta do this for the team, right? So whether I burned out or not, or was it a true burnout, or is the fact that burnout is just a sort of a myth? I don't know. But I've gone through the up and down. But I know it's a cycle, right? It's never going to be, rainbows and unicorns every other day, right? But on the days that I'm down, I found out what works for me in terms of cheering me up. And as you rightly pointed out, food is something that makes me happy.
Yeah.
So during COVID, while I was battling fires here and there, whenever I was down, I went to my favorite restaurants and supported them, right? So this is all, a byproduct of supporting local businesses, all right? But that being said, you gotta find what works for you, right? For me, swimming was a thing that really worked well for me. I felt like I was flying. I had the freedom. When I swim, I feel like I have the freedom, and all my stress just kind of leaks out, right? Not in that way, but leaks out in the pool, right? So the stress just goes away. So I think for everyone it's different. Some people is running, some people is reading, some people is meditation, and it's important for us as leaders to find what works for us in terms of getting out of a burnout cycle, and more importantly, having the companionship. Having people that you can confide in different things. I have business mentors that I can talk to about certain problems. I have my girlfriend that I can talk to about certain problems, and I have close friends that I can talk to about certain problems. And I think having that network and that circle of protection is key. And I think it's a basic human necessity. And a lot of times when in work, you forget about that. You get so sucked into work every other day.
Very true, very true. So I think we only have enough time for that. So I'm going to ask one last question. This is just to wrap up the discussion. So before we proceed to the Q&A, I have one final question for the three of you. And that is, in one sentence, what is the best practice for leaders to know in order to build a strong and healthy company culture? I mean, yeah, best practices, basically. Kevin, can we start with you before moving down to the rest?
Yeah, just communicate effectively with your team members.
Communication with team members. Yeah. All right. It's short and simple. Nadia, yourself?
I think it's important that you have to care. You have to care for the people who are working with you, and you have to care about the product, because if you don't care, then I think that lack of authenticity will come out, and it's very difficult to sustain over a long period of time. So,
authenticity and finally, Reggie?
People. I think people are our most important asset, and build your company around the people. And it's going to be different for different industry, different companies, right? But whoever you attract, make sure that they are aligned, and not just you build it around them, but make sure they are a part of that building process.
All right. So now it's come the time for Q&A. So we'll proceed to the Q&A session with our audience. And I see that we already have some questions in the chat box. So I'll take one right now. Just give me a second. All right. So the question is, what should what should no longer be part of a company's culture, and what kind of what kind of behaviors should leaders look out for and actively reject? Shall I pose that to you, Nadia?
Yeah, I think it's important, because I said caring is important, right? So the converse is that if you have someone within the organization who's only out for him or herself, then that's a warning sign for me, because I think that it's really difficult for other people to follow someone when that person clearly doesn't care or is only out for themselves. So I think that that's definitely one warning sign that I would not want to tolerate. And on a lighter note, I personally think that suits and ties should go out the window. There's climate change, and we spend way too much energy trying to air condition buildings just so people have to lift some dress code that was, from the industrial era.
I see. Well, I think if two contrasting ones, obviously your lawyers have to dress up, right?
Yeah.
And
I love my t-shirt.
Guys, yeah, exactly. Oh, we have one more question here. So, okay. What were some of the challenges you faced when you're creating culture, and how did you overcome them? So maybe like Rennie.
Resistance. People hate change by nature. And there are days where I have to fight them and say, hey, look, trust me, give me 2 months, right? Let's practice this. And if it all fails, right, then we go back to where it was. So having that negotiation helps a lot. But sometimes it's just pure resistance and go like, hey, you say you want to listen to us. Now we're telling you no, but you are insisting this on us. But sometimes as a leader, deep in your heart that, hey, look, this is good, and we need to make this change. And it's going to be a pain in the A, right? But it needs to be done. But I think there must be a middle ground to say, hey, look, how about this? We give this a try. And that is what usually works for us. And there are days, or there are times where some culture change didn't work and I was wrong. And when at the end of the day, I will admit and say, look, that wasn't a great idea and you guys were right. But when you have that back and forth, the team knows, hey, when he's going to execute something, he's going to implement something, we can give our input. And if it doesn't turn out, at least he listens. Yeah, but the hardest part is there will always be resistance. No matter what, there's always resistance.
Right. So I got a question here for Nadia. So the question is, what are the important traits a leader should have to act as a mentor to their staff? And what makes a good mentor?
Well, I think firstly, you have to listen because you need to know what people are looking for. See, not everyone is the same. Some people are actually quite happy doing what they're doing, and particularly in healthcare, right? Because you can rise up through the organization, become a CEO, or I can just be a specialist. I could be a very, very good pharmacist, for example. So you always have to understand what are people's underlying motivations and see how you can help them get there. So I think it's really important that A, you listen, have empathy, and B, you can switch your roles around. So I'm not saying that everything is always feel good, right? That's not reality. Sometimes you have difficult conversations with people, and sometimes the resistance can be as such that eventually they decide to leave. And that's not a reflection of your failure or theirs in particular. Maybe it just wasn't a good fit. So for me, I believe that there's always a place for everyone, but you might not necessarily be in that organization or that department. But having that open mind, sort of consider what are the possibilities, is really important because your people are the most important resource that you have. And how you play with that, how you manage that is key to your success.
Right. Aptly said. There's another follow-up for you, Nadia. So I think it's asking about your experience of running a hospital in these challenging times, and it calls for a lot of dedication from your staff, I'm pretty sure. So what was your experience in building up and keeping them, up and upbeat practically, you mentioned there were so many challenges with schools closing down and having to keep everyone is just so stressed up. So how did you deal with that?
Well, I think in healthcare, at least, there's always one absolute, which is the patient safety comes first. Because I always tell my staff, if the outcome is good, they can complain about the food tasting horrible. They can complain about, bed sheets are not soft enough, but all that pales into, what is the priority here? That I walk out of the hospital well. And I think it's really important to, again, always remind people about the mission, about why they're here, and the purpose that they're serving day in, day out, because it can get really exhausting. It can feel thankless because people will complain about little things. And sometimes you just tell them look, it's okay, because people are allowed to have bad days, you know. Sometimes I tell them like, look, maybe the doctor just had a really stressful surgery. That's why he went to the ward and yelled at you. I'm not saying that I tolerate harassment, have a word with the doctor, but be kind to people, right? And they're not going to be the same every day. So we got to remind ourselves of that as well.
Yeah, I think we all definitely need to have like that straight line of communication and being kind to each other, as you say. So one more question that we have coming up here is like, COVID came as a shock to many businesses and to the workforce as well. So there's a large turnover of resignations for companies, and you know, I think like I alluded to earlier, there's not a great resignation, but there's a great reprioritization of life in general, I think. So do you suggest that we still insist on bringing back pre-pandemic company culture to accept that, or should we continue with something new that we're forging forward right now? Kevin, could I start that with you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is a tricky question. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It really depends on the industry you're in. For example, healthcare. I mean, you can't have doctors working from home. I think certain, depending on your industry, for example, the legal industry, it is possible to work from home. It's possible to scan documents, but it's never the same because, for example, when I deal with clients whose personal life or whose business, their business livelihoods depend on one particular case, they would want to meet their lawyers face to face to know that we have the client's best interest at heart. So I think that in future there would be more of a hybrid model, but we've seen in the West a lot of people are starting to go back to office because I think there's pros and cons to both sides. But the main advantage of going back to office and having some form of routine is that, you know, there's all these cultural interactions in office that you just cannot get virtually. I'm sure many of you in the audience have had to work virtually for, you know, some of you for a short time, some for longer. It's not the same as meeting face to face and having those interactions. I think that in the workplace, it's not just about doing the job, but sometimes it's about those smaller interactions that adds to that satisfaction or experience within a company.
All right. And I mean, speaking of things that need to be done face to face, F&B is face to face, and to a certain extent, yes, we could order online and everything like that. But definitely, I think Randy, you mentioned that there's nothing beating seeing that customers face the enjoyment and satisfaction from them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Actually, I would like to add on to what Kevin said. I think two things that I personally think should be reevaluated is unpaid overtime. A lot of industries, and including in F&B, there are situations like this where, you know what, this work requires you to put in extra hour. You are expected to work on the weekends, right? It's a 6-day work week. I think that's unhealthy. I think more than ever, people are realizing that, hey, look, there must be to some extent, work-life balance. I also believe that work is life, life is work, but you need that time off for you to perform, right? Someone who works 6 days a week, and I'll be the first to say that, hey, we did practice that. Certain lower entry jobs do require them to work 6 days, but that 1 day of rest is really no rest. You sleep for most part of the day. You have no time for yourself. You have no time to develop yourself, read a book, listen to music, hang out with friends. Absolutely none, right? So in fact, for us, that's one of the first things that we are removing. Not just about overtime, but hey, have that five-day work day, and the other two, go enjoy, go uncompress. And the other part is abusive workplace culture. You know, again, I think recently in Singapore, there was this, I think NOS, they had this drama whereby, you know, the language she used is very common, right? When the boss, sometimes they will speak like that. But I don't think that should be normal. In fact, in a restaurant, you know, Gordon Ramsay is one that popularizes, you know, the idea that the angry chef is cool, right? But it shouldn't be that way. And that's something that we don't practice, and from day one we never practice that way. But when people come and work with us, certain people that work in the kitchen, they're like, you know, this is so refreshing, right? And that you don't have to fear the chef all the time. And I also know this exists in some offices, so that can be done away. And those are the things that I feel moving forward should be addressed and should not be normalized.
Okay, I think we have time for just one last question, and I'm going to pose it to you, Nadia. Although I think this was mentioned sometime before. So what can you say about company culture that we say treat each other like family? It sounds like a cliche sometimes, as Rennie has said before. So like, is it still relevant these times, do you feel, especially in the healthcare industry?
Yeah, I think that, treat family is, like I said, it's always a bed of roses, right? So sometimes, you get pissed off at each other, or you have to communicate, right? Because you realize that you're all in the same boat. So I think this was really important. Interestingly, I think with COVID, in the beginning, nobody knew much about the virus. Was it airborne? Was it contact precaution? What do we do? And to make it worse, there was a supply chain crunch. Couldn't even get basic PPE. And it created sort of an environment where, look, we're all in this together. Let's just innovate. Let's just 3D print attachments to snorkel masks and wear them in the OT. Let's just do it, right? We don't have time to sort of like think about, what are the issues. But now when we're going into endemic, then you start getting the questions like, should we be treating COVID patients long term? Because, maybe the other patients might be afraid of coming to the hospital. And that's when you start having the discussions. Well, for me personally, I feel like, every patient's life matters and they shouldn't stop becoming your patient just because they have COVID and you send them to a public hospital. And so we're having all of these discussions all the time with them, to sort of like come to an agreement together, right? That this is where we are heading. And when we have these discussions, values are really important, because I think like in a crisis, you don't have facts and information. What are you acting on? You're acting based on your values as your North Star, in terms of like, these are the kind of people we want to be, right? This is the kind of hospital we want to be. We're not just here to take your money and help you when you're a good patient for us, but when you become a difficult patient, we're just going to let you go. That's not us, right? So I think it's really important that you keep remembering that and have people around you who are honest to remind you as a leader that this is some conversations that you need to be having.
All right. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. I know we had some questions still coming in, but unfortunately we have run out of time. But so that's all the time we have tonight. And thank you everyone for making the time to come here and answer and have this really great discussion with it. I think it was really very insightful, everyone. And I hope each one of us takes away something from this discussion as well. So for guests who didn't get to get your questions answered or have any further questions, please direct them to the Gen T team and we'll follow up on this for you. And thank you to the speakers, like I mentioned. It's really great to be seeing you in person. I think a lot of us have been spending away time from each other too long, and it's great to have a discussion in person as well. And finally, a big thanks to our partner BMW Malaysia for making tonight's event possible. So do check out the article, which will be coming out next week on Gen T's website and social channels. And again, if you're posting anything about this event on social media, please use the tags that you see on the screen right now. So with that, thanks everyone. And I'm Chong Jin Seong. Good night.